In this video, we will go over the installation and deployment procedure of a fair data point, or FDP for short. Using the reference documentation as a guideline, we will set up the environment on a Linux server and configure the fair data point accordingly. The base system we will be using is a Ubuntu server distribution, the 18.4.LTS release. We start by installing the Docker engine by downloading and executing the convenience script provided by Docker. Next, we install Docker Compose, which is a convenience utility for interacting with the Docker engine. We add the current user, Ubuntu in our case, to the Docker group. This is so that we can interact with the Docker environment without having to change to a superuser. We refresh the environment so the changes are applied. For reference, the version of Docker we are running is 19.03.11 and the version of Docker Compose is 1.17.1. Next, we install the dependencies for the certbot utility. We add the Ubuntu repository for the certbot artifacts. And finally, we install the certbot utility. For reference, the certbot version we are using is 0.31.0. We create a directory scaffold for the fair data point configuration files. The owner of the directory is changed to our current user, so we can easily create and modify files. Next, we create the scaffolding for the nginx configuration files. We now copy the Docker Compose configuration from the reference documentation in the production deployment section. The default configuration is extended using some convenience descriptions for the services. We also mount the Let's Encrypt folder for nginx in preparation for a next step. We create an nginx.conf file and copy the content from the reference documentation as is. Next, we create a let'sencrypt.conf file and copy the configuration from the Let's Encrypt documentation. You can find the link in the video description. We now create an FTP site configuration for nginx and set it up to serve the Let's Encrypt challenge files. We copy part of the configuration from the reference documentation and add the Let's Encrypt configuration we previously created. Next, we symlink the site configuration from sites available to sites enabled. We can now go back to the fair data point root and start the proxy servers only using Docker Compose. With our proxy servers running, we now continue to retrieve the SSL certificates using certbot. We run certbot with the webroot plugin, and for the webroot path, we provide the path that we configured in the previous step. The email address is used for communication from the certificate authority. We agree to the terms. You can choose to opt in for information from the EFF. For this demonstration, we will use the demo.fairdtls.serve hosted domain. Certbot will now try to do a challenge response to verify the domain validity. Once succeeded, we can modify the site configuration to use the newly generated SSL certificates. We copy the other part from the reference documentation and adjust it to reflect our situation. The client is referenced using the name we configured in the Docker Compose configuration. The domain references are updated to reflect our situation. And last, we copy the Let's Encrypt configuration to our HTTPS block to ensure the renewal challenge will work too. Next, we create a new file for the fair data point configuration. We copy the skeleton from the reference documentation. we update the client URL property to reflect our current situation. And for this demonstration, we comment out the persistent URL property. Next step is to generate a key for security reasons. The generated key is pasted into the configuration file, and with that, the configuration setup is done. We will now use Docker Compose to start all the services we defined in our Docker configuration. We'll keep an eye on the logs to look for any errors. Once the log informs us that the application started, we can switch to a browser and verify that the FTP functions. We go to our demonstration domain and we see that the FTP is up and running. We log in as the default admin user and try to update the metadata of the repository layer to verify that everything functions. When saving the metadata, we can now see that the title is updated. And this concludes the demonstration of a fair data point deployment procedure.